So this is take 156, chapter 2, the chemistry of life, properties of water. So this is from derived from our unit 1, lesson 6. So the pre-assessments and the prerequisites that we went off of for this specific chapter are basically entailing like subatomic particles, and like chemical bonds. So the subatomic particles are more or less for the properties of water, just to identify it and just to understand and elaborate and just even build on what we're initially talking about. And even the chemical bonds, like for you to identify how water relates to to how water molecules relate or even interact with one another. Like we still need to know, how chemical bonds are formed, if they're either ionic, covalent, whatever the case may be. So we also refer to the chapter prior to this, which was called The Nature of Matter. Moving forward, so our major big goal is to get students to pass the living environments regions. So we've focused and put a great deal of time on the nature of unit 1, the nature of life, and it covers the science of biology and also the chemistry of life. So our end goal was to broaden and correlate real world things to basic scientific skills, and then our end chapter 2 goal is to build and set a firm foundation for chemistry. So in these two various chapters, which gave us this big unit, we wanted to go ahead and just lay a firm foundation for students, just to elaborate and just so that they can know that what we're doing, why it's vital, how do we get there, what steps did we take to even have us arrive to the bigger picture. Through assessing and correlating our standards, we use these specific standards. I list the Living Environment Core, also in terms of the NYC standards, and I also list the Literacy Common Core standards, and then also the Next Generation. I also did put in component of a writing component standard as well, because I do want my students to draw evidence from informational text to support analysis, reflection, and even our research that we do. So when it came down to it, I still was aware about not so much targeting, but developing students with IEPs and just ensuring that students with like learning disabilities were able to have like a variety of things, like in terms of visuals, kinesthetics, and also even auditory issues. Like, so initially, my do now would start off with I would have students grab an iPad from the iPad station, and I would just want them to research like various jobs into of biology. Not even just biology, science. Anything science related. Research something science. If you find a science article or even developing the science field, like what's in the science field. Like I don't want students just to know, just to think that since they're in a biology class that there are no other parts of science in the sense of like physics, chemistry, environmental science, and even earth science. Like we want our students to become scientists. Like that's something we all like want. But what's more vital is at least having maybe 5 out of 10 students become interested. And even with this little spark of interest, or within even this spark of like this little piece of information, or even this little activity that I want them to do, I just want them to open up their minds and just understand that there are many branches of science and it's not limited. And the world itself is not limited. I want them to realize that everything literally around them happens because of science. We are the people we are today. Like you have them iPads and those iPhones in your pocket because of science. If it wasn't for those things, we would not be who we are as mankind today. So moving forward, I wanted my students to identify the major properties of water and also compare bases and acids in solutions. And my focus questions were what are acidic solutions and what are basic solutions. Um, so I will move on by saying that so we asked what are acids, what are bases, but for us to even get that far, we have to use some type of scaffolding process to even get us there. Like in the sense of like what is cohesion, what is adhesion, like what is a solution, what is a mixture. Like we want students to use these scientific language just to even get to where they're supposed to. Like we want them to understand that these things are vital to even build up to our big goal. So I would more or less I would dictate these definitions to them, or I would dictate the words to them and then have them think about what these words mean and then have them, or then I will write it on the board for them or even dictate it. So after my definitions and after me dictating them these words, I will move on to two different various videos. One video is illustrating the properties of water. It's more or less educational. Both of them are educational, but one is more like informative in a sense, and the other one is more not formative, in, informal. But I want my students to understand that science is fun. Science has different aspects to it, and science doesn't just have to be boring. Like you should be able to listen to a song and still interpret what is happening around you, what's going on, how we get there, when do we arrive there. So this chart more or less aids to my visual learners and is more or less just because of the fact that they need color aids and just like diagrams and just things that are seeable, even just the colors, for them to know that they're dealing with a pH scale of colors. It'll help them better understand what's happening and how we measure different acidic levels or basic levels. Moving forward, I will engross my students into a mini lab to teach this lesson. This mini lab will compare acidic and basic foods. So more or less, I will have my students using like common household items, and this is just something that they can do at their desk. It doesn't require a lot of materials. Um, Basically, we we want them to determine what is each sample uh, acid or considered a base. We want them to construct the. I want them to construct a data table and be able to record the pH of each sample as well. And I also want them to get. I also want like this is more or less for the kinesthetic learners. It's something more hands-on, something more they can grasp, something more that they can feel. And you want students to have this variety in class, period, just so that they'll be engaged, just so that they know that science is literally in everything. Moving forward, in terms of analysis and the guided practice, I want them to analyze the samples and determine if most of the samples were acidic or base. I will also have them do a turn and talk and compare and contrast their answers to their partner. I learned a lot of times when you're dealing with your peers and just running ideas off of each other, you tend to build and gain a more vast knowledge of something you did not know. Like, you're able to grow in a different type of aspect. And I also want them to draw the correlation to life itself, like just in the sense that they're using household products to them using products that are, I want them to draw a relationship between household products and even just classroom etiquette, classroom environment, just knowing that they can bring these scientific aspects inside the classroom. So in terms of independent practice, um, I did I want students to develop a graphic organizer, and I also want them to identify the difference between a base and an asset within those graphic organizers. So it should have three major components: a base, an asset, and neutral. I want them to be able to identify each aspect in a sense. I want them to know, and if it has a pH of 7, you know automatically it's neutral. Just things like that. Be able to identify quick. So also, if I allow my students, if they finish early, that they can add any information to their personal KWL charts, I will have my students keep a KWL charts just to just as another formative assessment, because I really do want to see and understand what they're learning and to see if they're actually understanding the material. So the exit ticket will serve as the formative assessment for that day. And I want them to be able to identify a base, an acid, the properties of water, what's the polarity of water, um, what's the pH of water, what is a mixture, you know, like what's the major difference between cohesion and adhesion. So even in terms of the homework, this is just something that I will reinforce for my visual, auditory, and even kinetic learners. I gave them a variety of homework. Like, so I gave them, I want one to write a paragraph about a carbon atom. What is it? Like, what does it do? Basic. Then also I would want another person to draw a picture and describe a carbon atom. Like, what is that doing? How does it interact? What's going on? What's happening? How can we relate it to the lesson prior? Or you can construct a spoken word, a rap, or a song, something that just speaks to you, or maybe even a poem. Like, I feel like students are able to be themselves in the same token as learning. Like, they're able to have fun and still relate to what they're doing. And especially science is not always as interesting as everybody think it is, but when it comes down to it and you want your students to grasp these different lessons and these different entities, you literally help them. Like, you play to their strengths. So my further steps would just be the chemistry of carbon. So the homework kind of reinforces what is going to happen in the next lesson, and I will basically give that homework to them off of the formative assessment. No, I will basically give them that homework, given that I know that they understood the lesson. So the problems that I expect to encounter in this is students not fully understanding and grasping the topic of um, what a base is, what an acid is, and even like them not fully understanding what science is. Sometimes it's always harder for other students than it is. But I mean, when it comes down to it, I will probably like try to reinforce that. Like, I would try to give flashcards. Like, I would try to find something that I know works and speaks to the students.